guys, I'm Myra with Atomic Baby Cosplay, and today I wanted to do a video talking about how to get into the basics of sewing. Just kind of a back to basics, if you will, of some of the simple sewing concepts that I personally use, but not necessarily everyone knows, especially if you're a brand new beginner sewer. So today we're going to do a project. We're going to make a simple little pattern weight, which is silly simple, but very, very fun and gives a lot of good basic information. So if you want to learn how to make this little guy, stay tuned. Alright guys, so we're ready to get started. This is a pattern weight that you can buy from a traditional store, and it kind of gives you a rough idea of size. So this particular one is right around 1.5 inches in diameter or so. So that gives us a good idea of the size that a pattern weight could be. Now, we can make these any size that we want. So I think I'm going to make mine be a 2-inch square. So the thing that's important when you're making a pattern of your own and you're drafting yourself is to find an even edge. So this is a great right angle because it's a ruler meant for that, but you could also use a piece of paper and a ruler. So I'm going to draw 2 inches and 2 inches, and then flip it around and draw my 2 inches and 2 inches. So now I have a 2-inch square, right? Now here's the important point when it comes to making your own pattern pieces. I have a 2-inch square, but I actually need to be able to sew this, so I need a seam allowance. So I'm going to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to this. So you can do this in a couple of different ways. In the first place, you could have just measured a 2.5 inch square and know that you're going to make a 2-inch one in the end. Or you can do it this way, where I'm literally just drawing out the extra 1/2 inch on all sides. So once you have the shape that you want, in this case a 2.5 inch square, I am going to cut it out of my paper. So now I have a 2.5 inch square pattern piece. Now, something I like to do when I make my own pattern pieces is to make sure that I write on them what they are. So I'm going to put pattern weight, cut 2. So I want to cut 2. The reason I want to cut 2 is in order to have a square, I need to have a front and a back. So cut 2. You could also, if you wanted to, cut 1 on the fold. So you would line up one of the edges with the fold of your fabric, and you could just cut 1 and fold it over on itself and just sew up the 3 sides. I just don't really want to do that, so I'm going to cut 2. So the next step is to pick out our fabric. In this case, I'm going to pick out just a piece of scrap fabric that I have lying around. I'm going to iron it so that it's nice and smooth before I cut out my pattern piece. This is super important. You can iron the actual paper pattern pieces if you want to get really particular, because that will help them to lie really, really smooth before you cut them out and give you a more accurate cut. And you definitely want to make sure that your fabric is smooth and pre-washed. You want to wash it before you cut things out of it, just to make sure that it doesn't shrink on you. So here's my pattern piece. Now, when we cut out things from patterns, generally speaking, our pattern pieces are going to have an arrow. That arrow is going to designate the grain line, and you want it to go parallel to the selvage edge. This is the selvage edge of the fabric. It's where the fabric is woven extra tight so that it won't unravel on you while you're working with it. So my pattern piece doesn't have a grain line because it doesn't matter, it's a pattern weight. But imagine it goes this direction where it's pointing this way. So I'm lining it up parallel to the selvage edge. Now, because I have to cut 2, I'm going to fold this in half, and I'm going to keep my selvage edges even so that I know my grain line is even. It's not super important on this type of thing, but I'm going to do it anyways. And then I'm going to pin. Now, because this is so small, I'm just going to pin the 1 pin in the middle. You generally want to try to pin as few pins as possible. The more pins you have, the more it upsets your fabric. You can see that it kind of causes a pucker, and that can affect the final garment if you're looking for something that's really precise. So the next step is cutting it out. Now, one of the ways to get a more precise cut is when you look at your scissors, you can see that this is, my lower blade is on this side and my upper blade's on this side. I want to generally cut where I can see best what I'm doing. And the way to do that is to make sure you're cutting so that the inside of the upper edge is the side that is closest to your pattern piece. So in this case, that would be this direction, and you can see the inside upper edge of my scissors are closest to my pattern piece. And I'll show you why. If I cut it this way, it is much harder for me to make sure that I'm being accurate. I can still do it, but it is much harder. And the harder it is to be accurate, the more likely you are to be inaccurate. And accuracy is the most important thing when it comes to sewing. So you want to make sure that you cut your pattern pieces to be as accurate as possible. Alright, so our next step is to take these two pieces, and this is our right side and our wrong side. Most fabrics will have a right side and a wrong side. The wrong side is usually the least attractive side, and the right side is the right side, where it's most attractive. But don't let that stop you. With cosplay, you can do anything you want, and so you can choose to line up different parts. But in this case, I'm going to have the sparkle side be the right side. So I'm going to put my pieces of fabric right sides together, and I'm going to sew around the edges. Now, I'm going to start here. So I'm going to put a pin here. I'm going to start right where this pink butterfly is, and I'm going to sew all the way around all four sides, and I'm going to stop right here, leaving this tiny little opening. Now, when I sew with cottons, I don't generally use pins because I have enough experience to not need them, but for the sake of this video, I want to show you guys how you should pin. So you should generally pin, again, kind of as few as possible, as few as you can get away with. So in this case, I'm going to do these 3. So when you pin for sewing, you can add as many pins as you feel like you need to do, as long as they keep your fabric in the places it needs to be. So I've added 3. One of the keys with pinning is pinning with the pin head towards the raw edge of the fabric. This makes it easier when you're going around to pull the pin heads out as you're sewing. The other thing that I like to do is to put my pins in horizontally. So I'm going to be sewing starting here and going to this corner, pivoting and going up to this corner. And I like to have my pins horizontal so I can get my sewing foot up as close as possible to the pin before I pull it out. If I have it in vertically, I need to remove the pin much sooner. So your sewing machine will tell you how far away each of these lines is from your needle. I know from experience that this line right here with no number is my 5/8 inch mark, and this line with the 1 in it is my 1/4 inch mark. So I know that if I kind of sew in between those two, I'm going to end up with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So like I said, I'm going to start by stitching on this first side first with no pins. I'm going to put a couple stitches in, and then I'm going to back stitch. So I know from my machine that when I see this tiny little dot down here, that's about where I want to pivot in order to stay close to that one line. So I'm going to pivot there. When I pivot, all I do is I lift up my presser foot. You can see back here, I lift up my presser foot, and then I turn my piece. One of the most important parts of pivoting is keeping your sewing machine needle in the fabric. That helps it to stop the fabric from going anywhere, and you have a seamless line of stitching. So I'm going to line it up with the 1, and I'm going to sew to the next corner. And then I'm going to pivot again. I like to take my pins out as I'm sewing or when I'm at a pivot point like that because it helps to keep my stitching looking nice and smooth. And then I'm going to go forward a little bit more and then go backwards because this is my last edge. So I'm going to lift my needle out of the fabric and I'm going to pull it away. And then here I like to snip my threads close to the fabric instead of close to the machine. If you snip your threads close to the machine, your machine will unthread itself quite often. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clip the corners. So that's going to look like this, where I'm just clipping these guys. I'm going to turn my pattern weight right side out. Okay, and now I'm going to fill it with rice. So I have a bowl of rice right here, and I'm literally just going to put some rice inside my pattern weight. There's no system. So now I'm going to do a tiny bit of hand stitching. So I've threaded a needle. In this case, I like to thread with the thread going through it and doubled up, and then I just put a knot at the end. It's not a super long piece of thread because it doesn't need to be. If this was a larger item, you could definitely do this on your sewing machine, but because this is so small, I don't really want to mess with trying to get it through my sewing machine. It's not worth the effort. You could do it, but it's seriously not worth the effort. Just hand sew it. So I don't care about this looking super fancy because it's just a pattern weight for my sewing room. So I'm just going to do a simple whip stitch. So the key with whip stitches being durable and a good finish is to keep them close together. So you need to make sure that you don't spread them out too far and make them too big. If they're too big, they won't keep your item closed. And in this case, rice would fall out, and that would be very sad. And you can see I've just tucked in the raw edges. You could press this if you wanted a really nice polished finish. As I said, I don't really care a whole lot, so I'm just making this a quick, simple project so that I can use it in my sewing studio. All right, right down to the very end. And then right at the end, I'm just gonna make a little knot in my thread. And then I'm gonna clip it. And then I'm paranoid, so for added security, I like to tie these together again, my 2 strings. And then I'm just going to clip my threads kind of close to my stitching. Alright, and there you have it. It's just a little simple pattern weight. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. I hope it was helpful to learn how to make a pattern weight and that you got some kind of basic sewing knowledge from this. This was really meant less to be a tutorial on how to make a pattern weight, although it is, viable as that, but also more of just a, here's how to do some really, really basic, simple stuff. Keep in mind you can make your pattern weights in different sizes or shapes or fabrics. You can use heavier items if you want to, if you feel like the rice isn't heavy enough. You can also use washers or other things like that. I find the rice is plenty for me, but to each their own. And with that, I'm all done. So if you guys want to see more about sewing and cosplay, definitely click subscribe. I do videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays on a sewing or cosplay topic. And if you want to learn more about getting back to basics of sewing and other sewing tips, come join my free Facebook community over on Facebook. There's a link down below. That was kind of redundant, but we're going to go with it. And lastly, if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below with whatever your best tips are for learning how to sew. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Bye!